23 Russian Mafia members stormed a single-dad veterans restaurant yet by closing time. The men who came to destroy him were wearing aprons, carrying plates, and the shocking truth of how it happened will leave you breathless. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the frost-painted windows of Callahan's place, creating a warm glow that danced across the well-worn counter. Jack Callahan's skilled hands moved with practiced efficiency as he flipped a row of golden pancakes, the sizzle of the griddle, a familiar comfort in the cozy diner. "Order up, May," he called out, sliding a plate of steaming blueberry pancakes toward his longtime waitress. His voice carried the gentle authority of his Marine years, though softened by decades of serving comfort food to his neighbors. In the corner booth, Emily sat surrounded by textbooks and notebooks, her dark hair falling forward as she concentrated on her math homework. She chewed thoughtfully on her pencil, a habit she'd had since grade school. Jack caught himself smiling at the sight. She looked so much like her mother in moments like these. "Need any help with that homework, sweetheart?" he asked, wiping his hands on his apron as he passed her booth. Emily looked up, her eyes bright with determination. "I've got it, Dad. Besides, you're busy enough as it is." She gestured to the half-full diner with a knowing smile. The regular afternoon crowd filled the space with the low murmur of conversation and the clink of coffee cups against saucers. At the counter, old Bill Thompson hunched over his usual cup of black coffee, discussing the weather with Tom Gardner, whose family had farmed the same plot of land for 3 generations. "Telling you, Jack," Bill called out. "This winter's going to be harder than last. My knee's acting up something fierce, and it never lies about the weather." "That's so, Bill?" Jack responded, refilling the man's coffee cup without being asked. "Thought it was your elbow that was the weather prophet?" "Nah, that's for rain, knees for snow." Bill tapped his gnarled fingers against the counter. "Mark my words." As if on cue, fat snowflakes began drifting past the windows, adding to the already substantial blanket of white covering the small Ohio town. Jack watched them fall, remembering how Sarah used to say each snowflake was a wish waiting to be caught. The thought of his late wife sent a familiar ache through his chest, but he pushed it aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. The diner needed him, these people needed him, and dwelling on the past wouldn't change it. At another table, a group of truckers huddled over their meatloaf specials, their conversation drifting across the diner. "Mason's feed store's closing down," one of them said, shaking his head. "Third business this month." "Town's dying," another agreed, stirring his coffee absently. "My route's getting shorter every month. Less deliveries, less stops." Jack had heard this conversation too many times lately. The town was struggling, no doubt about it, but Callahan's place remained a constant, a warm refuge where people could forget their troubles over a hot meal and friendly conversation. "Hey, Dad?" Emily's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Can you check this problem for me?" He walked over, grateful for the distraction, and leaned over her shoulder to look at the algebra equation she was pointing to. The familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo reminded him again of Sarah. "Well, let's see here," he began. But the sharp jingle of the bell above the door cut him off. The temperature in the diner seemed to drop several degrees as the first man entered. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat dusted with snow, he carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from being dangerous. His face was hard, weathered, with eyes that had seen too much. Behind him came another, then another. They filed in silently, their heavy boots leaving wet prints on the linoleum floor. Their accents, when they muttered to each other, were thick with Russian consonants. Jack straightened slowly, every instinct from his Marine days suddenly alert. He counted them as they entered. 5, 10, 15, until 23 men in dark coats filled his diner, taking up every empty seat and most of the standing room. The usual chatter died away, replaced by a tense silence broken only by the soft hiss of the griddle and the muted clinking of silverware as regular customers tried to make themselves invisible. Emily had gone very still in her booth, her homework forgotten. Jack's hands clenched briefly at his sides, then relaxed. He'd faced worse odds in combat, though that had been years ago. Still, some things you never forgot, like how to read a room full of threats, how to control your breathing, how to prepare for whatever came next. He caught May's eye and gave her a slight nod. She understood immediately, moving quietly to stand near Emily's booth, ready to get his daughter to safety if needed. The first man who had entered, clearly the leader of this group, settled himself at the counter directly in front of Jack. His cold eyes met Jack's, measuring, assessing. The man's fingers, scarred and thick-knuckled, drummed once on the counter surface. The diner had become so quiet that the soft pat of snowflakes against the windows seemed loud in comparison. Old Bill's coffee cup trembled slightly in his hand. The truckers had stopped eating, their forks frozen halfway to their mouths. Jack felt the weight of the moment, the tension building like a thundercloud. But beneath his calm exterior, his mind was already running through options, scanning for weapons, marking exits, all while maintaining eye contact with the Russians seated before him. Emily shifted slightly in her booth, and Jack could sense her fear without having to look at her. His daughter's safety was his first priority, but any sudden movement now might trigger whatever was about to happen. The Russian's lips curved in what might have been a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He placed both hands flat on the counter, and the rest of his men seemed to tense in response, like a single organism preparing to strike. The snow continued to fall outside, creating an eerily peaceful backdrop to the scene unfolding within Callahan's place. 23 pairs of hard eyes focused on Jack, waiting for whatever would come next, while his regular customers held their breath, trapped in this moment between peace and violence. The temperature in Callahan's place seemed to drop 20 degrees as the Russian men spread throughout the diner. Their heavy boots tracked snow across the clean linoleum floor, and the scent of leather and cigarettes overpowered the usual aroma of coffee and maple syrup. A tall man with a jagged scar running down his left cheek stepped forward. His presence commanded attention, and the other men parted to let him through. This was clearly their leader, his cold gray eyes fixed on Jack with predatory focus. "Nice place," the Russian said, his accent thick. "Would be shame if something happened to it." He planted his palms on the counter, leaning forward. "We're here for protection money, and whatever's in register." The remaining customers began a rushed exodus. The bell above the door chimed repeatedly as they hurried out into the snow, leaving only Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, both in their 80s, frozen in their usual corner booth. Emily stood rigid by the coffee maker, her face pale, fingers gripping a pot so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Jack's mind flashed back to Iraq, the stillness before chaos, the weight of responsibility for lives in his hands. His combat training surfaced not as aggression, but as clarity. He knew the shotgun waited under the counter, just 6 inches from his right hand, but reaching for it would only escalate things. Instead, Jack took a slow, deliberate breath. He met the Russian's gaze steadily, noting the shadows under the man's eyes, the way his men shifted restlessly. These weren't just thugs, they were hungry men trying to look dangerous. "My name's Jack Callahan," he said, keeping his voice even. "And I'd like you all to sit down." He gestured to the empty seats. "First meal's on the house." A burst of harsh laughter erupted from several of the men. The leader's expression darkened. "You think this is joke?" "No joke," Jack replied. "But you look like you could use a hot meal. We've got fresh coffee, too." He maintained eye contact with their leader. "What's your name?" The Russian's jaw tightened. "Victor," he answered after a pause, seeming almost surprised at his own response. "Well, Victor, our hash browns were just voted best in the county. Would be a shame not to try them while you're here." Jack's calm demeanor created a strange bubble of normalcy in the tense atmosphere. Victor's men exchanged uncertain glances. One of them, a younger guy with hollow cheeks, unconsciously licked his lips at the mention of food. "You mock us?" Victor demanded. But there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, maybe curiosity, maybe hunger, maybe both. Jack shook his head. "No mocking, just offering food." He turned slightly toward the grill, keeping Victor in his peripheral vision. "Emily, honey, would you mind getting these gentlemen some coffee?" Emily's hands trembled as she set down the pot she'd been clutching and reached for clean cups. The clink of ceramic against ceramic betrayed her nerves, but she started pouring coffee with determined focus. The Russians remained standing, watching this domestic scene unfold with increasing confusion. The smell of fresh coffee began to fill the air, mixing with the scent of cooking meat as Jack calmly started working the grill. "Sit," Victor finally commanded his men, though his tone carried a note of uncertainty. The Russians gradually settled into booths, and at the counter, their movements stiff and wary. Emily began distributing coffee cups, her steps careful but growing steadier. Jack worked efficiently, muscle memory taking over as he prepared eggs, hash browns, and bacon. The familiar rhythm of short-order cooking helped steady his own racing heart. The first plates came out steaming. Emily delivered them with shaking hands but managed not to spill anything. The Russians stared at their food as if expecting a trick, watching as Jack continued cooking with methodical precision. Victor was the last to receive his plate. He studied the perfectly cooked eggs and golden hash browns with suspicion. The diner had fallen into an eerie silence, broken only by the soft scrape of utensils as some of the braver men began to eat. Finally, Victor picked up his fork. He cut into the eggs, the yolks running golden across the plate. With deliberate slowness, he raised the fork to his mouth. The entire diner seemed to hold its breath. Victor chewed thoughtfully, his expression unreadable. Then, his eyes met Jack's. "Not bad, soldier," he said, the words carrying a mix of surprise and reluctant respect. The tension in the room shifted but didn't break. The Russians ate their food, their initial aggression temporarily forgotten, replaced by something more complex and uncertain. Jack kept cooking, Emily kept serving, and the Petersons remained frozen in their corner, witnesses to this surreal scene of hospitality offered at gunpoint. Though no weapons had been drawn, everyone knew they were there. The threat still lingered beneath the surface, like ice under fresh snow. But for now, at least, the men who had come to rob the place were eating breakfast instead. Victor's men occupied nearly every booth, their massive frames making the diner's furniture seem almost toy-like. Jack worked the grill with practiced efficiency, but his mind raced. The sizzle of bacon and the scrape of his spatula filled the tense silence. Through the kitchen window, he caught glimpses of Emily. She stood near the coffee station, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged clean mugs. The sight of his daughter's fear made something shift inside him. "You know," Jack called out, keeping his voice light despite his pounding heart, "if you fellows are planning to stay a while, you might as well make yourselves useful." He flipped a perfect golden pancake. "Plenty of dishes that need clearing." The diner went deadly quiet. Even the coffee maker seemed to hold its breath. Victor's scarred face remained stoic for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth twitched. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "You heard him?" he barked in heavily accented English. "Get up. Clear tables." His men exchanged confused looks, but none dared question him. One by one, they rose from their seats, looking comically out of place as they began collecting empty plates and coffee cups. "Dmitri, wipe that table properly," Victor commanded a hulking man with tattooed knuckles. "Yuri, coffee needs refilling." He turned to Jack. "Where are aprons?" Jack pointed to a hook near the kitchen, trying to hide his astonishment. "Help yourself." The scene that unfolded was unlike anything the diner had ever witnessed. Burly men in leather jackets struggled to tie apron strings. A man with a shaved head and gold teeth carefully balanced a coffee pot. Another, whose brass knuckles bulged in his pocket, meticulously arranged sugar packets. Word spread quickly through the small town. Curious faces began appearing at the windows. A few brave souls ventured inside, their eyes wide as they watched known criminals shuffle between tables with order pads. "How you want eggs?" a heavily tattooed man asked an elderly woman who'd cautiously taken a seat. His accent was thick, his expression earnest. "Over easy," she squeaked, clutching her purse. "Over easy," he shouted toward the kitchen with surprising enthusiasm. Emily moved between tables, showing the men how to properly set places and stack dishes. Her initial fear had given way to something like amusement. She caught her father's eye across the diner. "They're like waiters," she whispered when she reached the counter. Jack watched as Victor instructed a younger man on the proper way to carry multiple plates. "Better than enemies," he replied softly. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere began to shift. The tension gradually melted like snow on a warm window. The Russians' attempts at American-style customer service, though clumsy, had an odd charm that drew more people in. Even some of the regulars who had fled earlier returned, unable to resist the spectacle. "No, no," Emily was saying to a group of them. "The forks go on the left side." The men listened intently, their faces serious as if receiving tactical instructions. The diner filled with the clash of dishes, the hum of conversation, and increasingly, laughter. Real laughter. When one of the men dropped a stack of plates, instead of anger, there were good-natured jokes in mixed English and Russian. Victor moved through it all like a conductor, directing his unlikely orchestra of servers. Jack noticed how the man's stern facade occasionally cracked, revealing something almost gentle in his eyes when he spoke to Emily or thanked Jack for a fresh cup of coffee. As closing time approached, the last customers filtered out, still shaking their heads in amazement at what they'd witnessed. The Russians gathered near the counter, their aprons stained, but their faces oddly satisfied. One of them, a younger man with kind eyes, began humming. Another joined in, and soon the diner filled with the deep, melodic sounds of a Russian folk song. Their voices blended in perfect harmony, the unfamiliar words somehow fitting in the warm, coffee-scented air. Jack wiped down the counter, taking in the surreal scene. These men who had entered as threats were now singing in his diner, their faces softened by the evening's strange events. Emily sat in a booth, her homework forgotten, watching them with wonder. The song ended, and the men began gathering their coats. They returned the aprons, now wrinkled and spotted with coffee stains, to their hooks. Jack stood by the door as they filed out into the snowy night, nodding to each one. Victor was the last to leave. He paused in the doorway, his massive frame blocking the cold air. "You don't know what you've started, old man," he said softly. Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows of the modest two-story house Jack and Emily called home. Steam rose from 2 mugs of hot chocolate on their worn wooden table, the rich aroma mixing with the scent of buttered toast and scrambled eggs. Emily couldn't stop smiling as she spread strawberry jam on her toast. "Dad, did you see how that big guy, I think his name was Dmitri, kept apologizing every time he dropped a fork? And remember when they all started singing?" Jack managed a small smile, but his eyes held worry. He pushed his eggs around his plate, his appetite not quite there. "Yeah, it was something else." "And when Mrs. Henderson came back in? Her face?" Emily giggled, then took a sip of her hot chocolate. "I thought her eyes were going to pop right out of her head when that tall one pulled out her chair for her." "Emily." Jack's voice was gentle but serious, his fingers wrapped around his mug, drawing comfort from its warmth. "Men like that don't just walk away. What happened last night, it was different, special even. But we need to be careful." Emily's smile faded a little. "But Dad, they helped us. They were nice." "Sometimes nice isn't the whole story, sweetheart." Jack reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I saw good in them too, but they're caught up in something dangerous." "Like you were? In the Marines?" Jack shook his head. "That was different. I chose to serve. These men." He trailed off as the doorbell rang. Both of them tensed. Jack stood slowly, his military training evident in his careful movements. "Stay here," he told Emily, his voice firm. Through the front window, Jack saw Victor standing on their porch, alone. The Russian's massive frame seemed almost hunched, less threatening than the night before. Snow dusted his dark coat. Jack opened the door, keeping his body positioned to block any view of Emily. "Victor, may I come in?" Victor's accent was thick, his voice low. "Need to talk. Just me." After a moment's consideration, Jack stepped aside. "Emily, head upstairs, please." "But Dad..." "Now, sweetheart." Emily gathered her dishes and went upstairs, though Jack could tell by the slow creaking of the steps that she was taking her time. Victor stood awkwardly in their living room, looking out of place among the family photos and comfortable furniture. His eyes lingered on a picture of Jack, Emily, and a woman with Emily's smile, Jack's late wife. "Coffee?" Jack offered. Victor shook his head. "What you did last night was kind. Too kind." He turned from the photos. "But you don't understand. Those men, we are not free men." Jack sat in his armchair, gesturing for Victor to take the couch. The springs creaked under the Russian's weight. "Tell me." "Sergei Ivanov." Victor practically spat the name. "He owns us, all 23, some through debt, some through threats to family. Me?" He gave a bitter laugh. "Both. My daughter needs medicine. Expensive. American doctors. American prices. Sergei pays. But the debt never ends." Jack leaned forward. "There's always a choice, Victor." "Choice?" Victor's laugh was harsh. "You think we choose this life? To be thugs? Criminals? My father was professor in Moscow. Now I break fingers for living." He stood abruptly, pacing. "Sergei will hear about last night. Already his men watch your diner. They see weakness in kindness." Jack closed his eyes briefly, then stood. "Let me pray with you." Victor stopped pacing. Prayer? He scoffed. God left Russia long time ago. God's bigger than borders. Jack stepped closer to the towering Russian, and he's bigger than Sergei Ivanov. For a moment, Victor's hard expression cracked, revealing something vulnerable underneath, but he quickly shook his head. Prayer won't stop bullets, won't pay debts, won't heal my Natasha. Maybe not directly, Jack said quietly, but it might show us a way forward. Sometimes that's all we need, just enough light to take the next step. Victor stood still for a long moment, then slowly inclined his head. Jack placed a hand on the Russian's shoulder and began to pray, his voice steady and warm in the quiet room. When Jack finished, Victor's eyes were bright with unshed tears. He blinked them away quickly, squaring his shoulders, but something had shifted in his bearing, like a tiny crack in a stone wall. "Thank you for breakfast last night," Victor said gruffly. "Was good pancakes. The diner's open every morning at 6, Jack replied. "Coffee's always hot." Victor nodded once, then moved to the door. He paused with his hand on the knob. "Jack, be careful. What you did showing kindness, it makes Sergei angry. Very angry." Then he was gone, heavy boots crunching in the fresh snow. Jack stood in the doorway of his house, watching Victor's broad figure disappear into the swirling white. The morning was quiet except for the soft whisper of falling snow, but Jack could feel it in his bones. This was far from over. "Dad?" Emily's voice came from the top of the stairs. "Is everything okay?" Jack kept his eyes on the empty street where Victor had vanished. "I don't know, sweetheart. I really don't know." Word traveled quickly through their small Ohio town. By Sunday morning, the previous night's events at Callahan's place had transformed from fact to legend, each retelling more dramatic than the last. Outside the red brick First Methodist Church, clusters of people huddled in the crisp morning air after service. Their breath formed small clouds as they debated what had happened at the diner. "Jack Callahan's got more courage than sense," declared Martha Whitman, adjusting her powder blue church hat. "Standing up to those thugs like that, he could have gotten himself and Emily killed." "Or maybe he's just showing Christian charity," countered Tom Peterson, the hardware store owner. "Isn't that what Pastor Roberts just preached about? Loving your enemies?" "There's a difference between loving your enemies and serving them pancakes," Martha shot back, her lips pursed tight. Similar conversations echoed through the aisles of Wilson's grocery. Mrs. Henderson, who had witnessed part of the previous night's events, found herself surrounded by curious shoppers near the produce section. "I tell you, it was the strangest thing," she said, gesturing with a head of lettuce. "These rough-looking men, all muscles and tattoos, wearing aprons and asking if I wanted more coffee. But you know what? They were polite. One of them even called me Madam." At the checkout counter, Harry Wilson, the store owner, shook his head. "Jack's playing with fire. Those Russians aren't here for the pie. They're criminals, plain and simple." By Monday morning, the tension had reached City Hall. Jack stood in front of his diner, wiping down the windows, when Gerald Myers, the city's business license administrator, approached. His gray suit seemed too tight, matching his pinched expression. "Mr. Callahan," Myers said, clearing his throat. "We need to talk." Jack set down his cleaning cloth and faced the official. "What's on your mind, Gerald?" Myers glanced nervously up and down the street. "Listen, Jack, we've known each other since high school. I'm here as a friend first. The council's concerned about your new clientele." "You mean the men who helped serve dinner Saturday night?" Jack's voice remained calm, but his jaw tightened slightly. "These are known criminals, Jack. The kind of people we don't want in our town." Myers lowered his voice. "If you keep associating with gangsters, the council might have to review your business license." Jack's eyes met Myers steadily. "Are you threatening to shut me down for serving meals?" "I'm warning you that actions have consequences." Myers shuffled his feet. "Think about Emily. What kind of example are you setting?" "I am thinking about Emily," Jack replied. "I'm teaching her that kindness isn't just for people who look like us or live like us. It's for everyone." Myers shook his head. "You're making a mistake, Jack. A big one." "Maybe." Jack picked up his cleaning cloth again. "But it's my mistake to make." Inside the diner, Emily was arranging silverware rolls. She'd heard every word through the open door. When her father came back in, she stopped what she was doing and hugged him tight. "I believe in you, Dad," she whispered against his chest. "Mom would too." Jack's arms tightened around his daughter, and he kissed the top of her head. "Thank you, sweetheart." That means everything. The day passed with fewer customers than usual. Some regulars came in, making a point to show their support. Others walked past quickly, avoiding eye contact through the windows. As evening approached, the bell above the door chimed. Jack looked up to see Victor leading his men inside, just like before. The Russians filed in quietly, their faces uncertain but hopeful. Victor stepped forward. "We come to eat, and help again, if you let us." The diner fell silent. Jack could feel the eyes of his remaining customers on him, waiting to see what he would do. This was the moment: choose safety and turn them away, or stand by his convictions and face the consequences. Jack reached under the counter and pulled out a stack of clean aprons. "Kitchen's busy tonight. Could use the extra hands." Victor's weathered face broke into a small smile as he took an apron. One by one, the Russians stepped forward, accepting aprons and transforming once again from intimidating figures into awkward but willing servers. Through the windows, Jack could see people on the street stopping to stare. Some shook their heads and hurried past. Others stood watching, curiosity warring with disapproval on their faces. Inside, Emily started teaching a burly Russian man named Dmitri how to properly roll silverware and napkins. His huge hands moved carefully, almost delicately, as he followed her instructions. The sight made Jack's heart both ache and swell with pride. As Jack fired up the grill and began preparing dinner orders, he knew he'd just made his choice clear to everyone in town. There would be no going back now. But watching Emily laugh as she corrected Dimitri's napkin rolling technique, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. The evening settled into a rhythm of cooking, serving, and quiet conversation. The Russians moved between tables with growing confidence, and if the diner was emptier than usual, the warmth inside seemed to make up for it. The evening crowd had thinned at Callahan's place, leaving only the soft clink of dishes and murmured conversations. Jack wiped down the counter with slow, methodical strokes as he watched the unlikely scene before him. 3 of Victor's men, Dmitri, Ivan, and Alexei, were perched on ladders, fixing the perpetually leaking roof that had plagued the diner for years. "Please, Mr. Callahan, let me hold that ladder," Alexei called out, his young face etched with worry as Emily climbed up to hand tools to Dmitri. The boy's gentle nature seemed at odds with his association with the mob, and Jack noticed how his eyes followed Emily with particular concern. "She's steadier on her feet than most," Jack replied, but he appreciated Alexei's protectiveness. At barely 20, Alexei was the youngest of the Russians, with soft features that made him look even younger. Later that evening, as Emily helped Alexei wash dishes, she drew him into conversation. "So, why did you leave Russia?" she asked, passing him a plate to dry. Alexei's hands slowed on the dish towel. "My sister, Natasha," he said quietly. "She got very sick. The treatments, they cost so much." His eyes grew distant. "Sergei's men, they came to the hospital, said they could help. By the time I understood the true price." He trailed off, his knuckles white on the edge of the sink. Jack, pretending to organize receipts nearby, felt his heart clench. Each night brought new stories, each one a thread in a tapestry of desperation and regret. The next evening, Victor shared his own tale over coffee after closing. "I had a shop in Moscow," he said, his weathered face softening with memory. "Books, old ones. My father's business. Then the protection rackets came. First, just money, then demands. Before I knew it, he spread his hands helplessly. Now I collect from others what was once collected from me." One by one, the stories spilled out. Ivan had been a music teacher whose gambling debts had trapped him. Dmitri's wife had needed expensive medicine. Each man carried a burden of choices made in desperate time. The diner became their sanctuary. During quiet afternoons, they would slip in through the back door, taking on small repair jobs. The wobbly tables were fixed, the ancient coffee maker restored to perfect function, the cracked tiles replaced. Each task seemed to lift a small weight from their shoulders. Emily took to tutoring some of their children in the back booth, helping with English homework and math problems. Jack would watch her patient explanations, so like her mother's way with people, and feel a mix of pride and worry. "You remind me of my sister," Alexei told Emily one day as she helped him organize the storage room. "She loved books too, always dreaming of university." His voice caught. "She is better now, but the debt, it never ends." Jack noticed how the younger man's shoulders hunched under an invisible weight. He placed a fatherly hand on Alexei's shoulder. "There's always a way out, son. Always. The transformation in the men was subtle but unmistakable. Their hard edges softened. Laughter came more easily. Even Victor's stern face showed hints of the bookshop owner he'd once been. But peace never lasted long in Jack's world. It was nearly midnight when he noticed the black SUV. He was taking out the trash, the back alley lit only by a flickering security light. The vehicle sat across the street, engine idling, its tinted windows reflecting the yellow glow of the street lamps. Even from this distance, Jack could make out the silhouettes of Sergei's watchers. His military instincts kicked in as he casually finished his task, showing no sign he'd spotted them. Inside, his mind raced. How long had they been watching? What had they seen? Back in the safety of his kitchen, Jack's hands trembled slightly as he dried them on a dish towel. The diner felt different now, exposed, vulnerable. The warmth and security he'd built here suddenly seemed fragile. Later that night, in the quiet of his bedroom, Jack sat on the edge of his bed. The framed photo of Sarah, his late wife, watched him from the nightstand. Her smile was as warm and understanding as ever, even in this worn photograph. "What have I gotten us into?" he whispered, running his fingers over the frame. The silence offered no answers, but he found himself folding his hands in prayer, seeking guidance in the still darkness. The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when Jack stepped out of his truck, coffee thermos in hand. He stopped dead in his tracks. Bright red letters sprawled across the front window of Callahan's place, dripping like blood in the dawn light. Traitor. His hands trembled slightly as he set down his thermos on the sidewalk. The paint was still wet, probably done in the early hours. He touched one of the letters, coming away with red on his fingertips. "Dad!" Emily's voice rang out behind him. She'd just parked her bicycle and now stood frozen, staring at the vandalism. "Oh no." Jack squared his shoulders, trying to mask his anger for his daughter's sake. "It's just paint, sweetheart. We can clean it off." But Emily wasn't so easily fooled. She'd learned to read her father's tension in the set of his jaw, the way his eyes hardened. "This isn't right," she said, moving closer to inspect the damage. "You're helping people. How can they not see that?" Before Jack could answer, a familiar heavy tread approached from behind. Victor's massive frame cast a shadow over them both. "This is my fault," Victor said, his accent thick with regret. "We should not have come back." Jack turned to face him. "No, this isn't on you. Some folks just fear what they don't understand." Victor's scarred face twisted with worry. "You don't understand, Jack. Sergei, he knows about you now. What you're doing with us." He glanced around nervously before continuing. "He sees you as threat. Man who shows kindness to his men? Makes them feel human again? This is dangerous to him." Jack grabbed a bucket from inside and began filling it with soapy water. "I'm not backing down, Victor. Not from some paint. Not from Sergei." Emily helped her father scrub the windows as Victor watched, clearly troubled by their stubborn determination. Other townspeople walked by, some averting their eyes, others stopping to stare. Mrs. Henderson from the flower shop crossed the street to avoid passing directly in front of the diner. Later that afternoon, during the slow period between lunch and dinner, Emily approached Jack at the counter. She had that look he knew well, the one she'd inherited from her mother. All determination and heart. "Dad, I want to help more," she said, sliding onto a stool. "Alexei was telling me about his cousins. They're struggling in school because English isn't their first language." Jack paused in his coffee making. "Emily, I could tutor them," she pressed on. "After school, right here in the diner where you can keep an eye on everything. They're just kids, Dad." Jack studied his daughter's face, so much like her mother's when she had her mind set on helping someone. He thought of his late wife's passion for teaching, how she never gave up on a single student. "It's not that simple, sweetheart. These men, their families, they're in deep with dangerous people. But that's exactly why they need help," Emily insisted. "The kids shouldn't suffer for it. And maybe," she hesitated, "maybe if they learn, get better jobs someday, they won't end up like their parents." Jack sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "You sound just like your mother." Emily's face brightened. "Is that a yes?" "We'll try it," Jack conceded. "But I set the rules. First sign of trouble, it stops." The next afternoon, Jack watched as Emily set up a makeshift classroom in the corner booth. She'd brought extra notebooks, pencils, and had even dug out an old chalkboard from the storage room. Alexei arrived first, leading 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, all under 12. The kids looked terrified at first, clinging to Alexei's legs. But Emily had her mother's gift with children. She got down on their level, spoke softly, and soon had them giggling as she taught them simple English words through a game. More Russians arrived with their children, hovering uncertainly near the door until Jack waved them in. Victor came too, though he had no children of his own, and sat in the back watching with an unreadable expression. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the diner floor. Emily stood at the chalkboard, writing out basic sentences, while a dozen children who once would have been feared in town simply for their parents' reputations, sat attentively at the tables. "Cat," Emily said clearly, drawing a simple picture beside the word. "Koshka," one little girl whispered, then proudly attempted. "Cat," Emily beamed at her. "Perfect, Natasha." Jack watched from behind the counter, something tight in his chest loosening at the seam before him. These men, who had burst into his diner weeks ago looking for trouble, now sat quietly helping their children sound out English words. Alexei especially seemed transformed, his usual nervousness replaced by genuine joy as he helped the younger kids with their pronunciation. Even Victor, despite his intimidating presence, had softened. He'd pulled out reading glasses, an unexpectedly humanizing detail, and was carefully copying down words in a small notebook of his own. The afternoon sun caught the remains of the mostly scrubbed-away graffiti on the window, creating a faint red shimmer. But inside, in this moment, hope flickered like the warm diner lights, steady, quiet, but undeniably present. Emily wrote another word on the chalkboard. "Friend." The children repeated it, their accents thick but their smiles genuine. Their fathers, men who had lived by violence and fear, watched their children learn. And in their eyes, Jack saw something he recognized: the universal desire of parents to give their children a better life than their own. One of the younger boys raised his hand enthusiastically. "Friend," he said clearly, then pointed to Emily. "You are friend!" The early morning sun hadn't yet risen when Jack pulled into the diner's parking lot. Something was different. The familiar silhouette of Callahan's place looked wrong. His heart skipped a beat as he noticed unfamiliar trucks parked around back. He rushed from his truck, keys jangling in his hand, only to find Victor waiting by the front door with an uncharacteristic smile. "Morning, Jack," Victor said, his accent thick but warm. "We have surprise." Before Jack could respond, Victor opened the door. The bell's familiar jingle was accompanied by the smell of fresh paint and varnish. Jack stepped inside and stopped, his mouth falling open. The diner had been transformed. Every surface gleamed with care and attention. New curtains in warm earth tones hung at each window, replacing the faded ones he'd meant to change for years. The booths, once cracked and worn, now shone with fresh upholstery and deep burgundy. The counter, where he'd served countless meals, had been stripped and refinished to a rich mahogany glow. "How? When did you?" Jack struggled to find words. 23 Russian men emerged from various corners of the diner, some still holding paintbrushes or cleaning rags. Alexei, the young one, stepped forward with paint spots on his cheeks. "We work all night," he said proudly. 3 nights, actually, taking turns so you not notice." Jack walked slowly through his diner, touching the fresh paint on the walls, running his hand along the smooth counter. The floor had been thoroughly cleaned and polished, reflecting the overhead lights like mirrors. Even the old ceiling fans had been cleaned and balanced, no longer wobbling as they spun. "The grills?" Jack asked, heading toward the kitchen. "Clean as new," Victor answered, following him. "Dmitri used to be mechanic. He fixed everything." The kitchen was immaculate. Every surface had been scrubbed to a shine, the equipment cleaned and serviced. The walk-in cooler hummed quietly instead of rattling like it had for years. The bell jingled again, and Emily's voice called out, "Dad? Are you here early too? I forgot my—" She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening as she took in the transformation. "Oh my God!" She spun in a slow circle, taking in every detail. The Russians watched nervously, waiting for her reaction. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Just beautiful." The tension broke, and the men began chattering in mixed Russian and English, pointing out different improvements they'd made. Emily hugged several of them, making them blush and shuffle their feet. Jack stood in the middle of his renewed diner, overwhelmed. These men, whom the town had feared and shunned, had poured their hearts into this gift. Every repair spoke of care and gratitude. "Tonight," Victor announced, "we have grand reopening. Yes? Jack nodded, not trusting his voice. The day passed in a blur of preparation. Word spread through the town, and by evening, the parking lot was full. Inside, the Russians had donned clean aprons, trying their best to look professional despite their imposing figures. The bell jingled constantly as people streamed in. Some came out of curiosity, others with cautious support. The Russians greeted them all with earnest, if awkward, attempts at hospitality. Alexei proudly showed off the English he'd learned from Emily, taking orders with careful pronunciation. "Welcome to Callahan's place. Would you like coffee? Tea? We have very good pancakes." The older men moved between tables with surprising grace, carrying plates and refilling cups. Victor had stationed himself by the door, greeting people with a dignity that seemed to put even the most nervous visitors at ease. Laughter began to fill the air. The initial tension melted as food was served and conversations flowed. Someone started playing old country songs on the jukebox, and one of the Russians responded by singing a folk song from home. Soon, the diner echoed with both American and Russian music. Emily moved through the crowd like a spark of light, her joy infectious. She helped the Russians with difficult English words, translated for curious customers who wanted to know their stories, and kept everything running smoothly. At the grill, Jack worked steadily, but his eyes were often wet. Every time he looked up, he saw something that touched his heart. Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife, teaching 3 Russians to line dance. Old Mr. Jenkins sharing pictures of his farm with Dmitri. Alexei's young cousins playing cards with local kids in a corner booth. During a quiet moment, Emily came to stand beside him at the grill. She slipped her arm around his waist and leaned her head against his shoulder. "Mom would have loved this," she said softly. Jack nodded, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. The diner felt alive in a way it hadn't since his wife's passing. The warmth, the laughter, the sense of community. It was everything she had always wanted this place to be. "She always said food brings people together," Jack replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Guess she was right." Emily squeezed him tighter. "She was right about a lot of things. Like when she said you were the strongest man she knew. Not because of your muscles, but because of your heart." Jack had to turn away for a moment, pretending to check the grill temperature. When he looked back at his daughter, she was smiling knowingly. The celebration continued into the evening. The Russians served slice after slice of Emily's apple pie, announcing proudly that she had taught them the recipe. Town council members sat shoulder to shoulder with men they'd once crossed the street to avoid. Children darted between tables, playing elaborate games that seemed to involve both cowboys and cosmonauts. Outside, across the street, a black SUV sat idle in the growing darkness. Behind its tinted windows, Sergei watched the scene unfold, his expression as cold and hard as winter ice. But inside Callahan's place, warmth and hope continued to flow as freely as the coffee, healing old wounds and building new bridges with every passing moment. The streetlights cast long shadows across the snowy sidewalk as Jack and Emily walked home from the diner. Their footsteps crunched in perfect sync, leaving twin trails behind them. Emily hugged her textbooks close, her breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. "Did you see how Mrs. Peterson actually smiled at Dmitri today?" Emily said, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "I think she's finally warming up to them." Jack nodded, his weathered face softening at his daughter's optimism. "Amazing what a few weeks of good service can do, though I think your math tutoring with the kids has helped more than anything." Emily bumped her shoulder against his arm playfully. "Well, someone had to help them with their fractions. And did you notice how proud Anton was when his son got that B+ on his quiz?" They reached their modest 2-story house, its porch light welcoming them home. Jack watched as Emily climbed the steps, her dark hair catching the golden glow. For a moment, she looked just like her mother. "Get started on your homework," Jack said, zipping his jacket higher against the cold. "I've got to head back and finish the inventory count." Emily paused at the door. "You sure you don't want help? I could." "No, sweetheart. It's getting late. I won't be long." He waited until she was safely inside, before turning back toward the diner. The walk back felt different alone. The quiet town seemed to hold its breath, and Jack's combat instincts tingled. Something wasn't right. As he approached Callahan's place, he noticed a sleek black car parked out front, too clean, too expensive for their modest neighborhood. The bell chimed as Jack pushed open the door. The diner's warmth hit him, along with the lingering sense of coffee and apple pie. But the familiar comfort vanished when he saw the man sitting in the corner booth. Sergei Ivanov sat like he owned the place. His expensive suit, a stark contrast to the worn vinyl seats. Two men in dark coats stood near the door, their presence filling the small space with unspoken threat. "Mr. Callahan." Sergei's accent wrapped around the words like silk over steel. "Please, join me." Jack's military training kicked in. Assess threats, identify exits, maintain calm. He moved deliberately to the booth, sliding in across from Sergei. Up close, the crime boss's face was all sharp angles and cold calculation. "Coffee?" Jack offered, his voice steady. Sergei's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Always the gracious host. No, I'm here to discuss business." He pulled out an envelope, thick with cash, and laid it on the table. "You've been interfering with my operations, Mr. Callahan. Those men belong to me." "They're not property," Jack said quietly. "They're human beings. They're assets with debts to pay. Debts that grow larger every day they spend playing waiter in this." Sergei glanced around dismissively. "Charming establishment." The envelope slid across the table. $20,000. More than fair compensation for your humanitarian efforts. Take it and step aside." Jack didn't touch the money. Instead, he looked directly into Sergei's eyes, seeing the emptiness there. "You know what I see when those men serve tables? Pride, hope, something money can't buy." Sergei's expression hardened. "Hope is expensive, Mr. Callahan, and fragile." His finger traced a circle on the table's surface. "This place, your daughter's future, all so delicate, like fine china." His eyes glittered. "It would be a shame if something were to break." Jack's hands clenched under the table, but his voice remained calm. "This diner stands for hope, not fear." He pushed the envelope back. "And that's not for sale." The silence stretched between them, heavy with tension. Finally, Sergei stood, straightening his suit with meticulous care. "You Americans," he said, almost fondly, "always believing in fairy tales." He picked up the envelope. "Reality is much harsher, Mr. Callahan, you'll learn." Jack remained seated as Sergei walked to the door, his footsteps echoing in the empty diner. At the threshold, the crime boss paused. "Your daughter, Emily, yes? She has your eyes. Your conviction." His smile was chilling. "Give her my regards." The bell chimed again as they left. Jack moved to the window, watching as Sergei's car pulled away from the curb, its taillights bleeding red into the darkness. The vehicle disappeared around the corner, leaving only the quiet night and the weight of what was to come. Through the window's reflection, Jack could see the diner behind him, the freshly painted walls, the polished counter, the new curtains the Russians had hung with such care. Everything they'd built together stood as a testament to second chances and the power of kindness. But now, in the empty silence, those same walls seemed to whisper warnings of the storm gathering on the horizon. The clock on Jack's nightstand read 12:43 a.m. when Emily's terrified scream jolted him awake. His military instincts kicked in before his eyes even opened. The acrid smell of smoke filled his nostrils, and an orange glow flickered through his bedroom window. "Dad, the diner's on fire." Emily's voice cracked with panic. Jack leaped from his bed, yanking on his boots. Their small house sat just behind the diner, connected by a short pathway. Through the window, he could see massive flames already engulfing the restaurant's roof. His heart stopped. "Emily, call 911!" he shouted, running down the hallway. She was already at the front door, phone pressed to her ear, tears streaming down her face. "They're coming, Dad. They're coming." Jack burst out of the house, the winter air hitting his face like a slap. The heat from the inferno was intense, even from 30 feet away. The diner, his legacy, his wife's dream, was being devoured by angry orange flames that reached toward the night sky. The fire roared like a living thing, shattering windows and consuming everything in its path. Sparks flew into the darkness. The hand-painted sign that read "Callahan's Place" curled and blackened in the heat. Emily ran out behind him, still in her pajamas. "Dad, no!" she screamed as he sprinted toward the building. "Stay back," he ordered, his marine voice cutting through the chaos. He had to check if anyone was inside, had to try to save something, but the heat pushed him back like a wall. The front door was completely engulfed, and flames poured from every window. The fire had spread too fast, too deliberately. This was no accident. Sirens wailed in the distance. Neighbors emerged from their homes in robes and coats, gathering on the street in horrified clusters. Some had their phones out, recording the destruction. Others just stood with their hands over their mouths. The first fire truck arrived with a screech of brakes. Firefighters jumped out, unrolling hoses and shouting commands. Jack felt Emily's hand grip his arm as they watched helplessly. "My homework. All my books," Emily whispered. She'd left her school supplies in their usual booth just hours ago. "It's just stuff," Jack said hoarsely, pulling her close. "We're alive. That's what matters." More sirens approached. Police cars this time. Their blue and red lights painted the snow in alternating colors. And then Jack heard familiar voices shouting in Russian. Victor and several of his men were running toward the diner from different directions. They must have seen the flames from wherever they were staying. Victor's face was twisted with rage and grief. "Jack," he called out, "we came as soon as we saw. This was Sergei. I know it was freeze. Hands where we can see them." Police officers drew their weapons surrounding the Russians. "On your knees now." "No, wait." Jack stepped forward. "They didn't do this. They're here to help." But the police were already moving in, forcing the Russians to the ground. One officer grabbed Victor's arms, roughly cuffing him as he struggled. "We would never burn the diner," Victor shouted, his accent thick with emotion. "Jack knows this. Emily, tell them." Emily tried to run toward them, but Jack held her back. "They're innocent," she cried. "They helped build this place." More officers arrived, reading rights and leading the Russians to waiting patrol cars. Jack could see the betrayal in Victor's eyes as he was pushed into the back seat. "Jack!" Victor called out one last time. "Sergei will pay for this. I swear it." The police cars pulled away, leaving Jack and Emily standing in the swirling snow and ash. The firefighters continued their assault on the flames, but Jack could tell it was too late. The roof was starting to cave in. Everything he'd built over the years, the countless meals served, the laughter shared, the sanctuary he'd created, was disappearing before his eyes. The booth where his wife used to sit and do the books, the kitchen where he'd taught Emily to flip pancakes, the counter where Victor's men had awkwardly learned to be waiters, all of it consumed by flames. Jack's legs gave out, and he sank onto the cold curb. Emily collapsed beside him, her body shaking with sobs. "Why, Dad?" she choked out. "We were just trying to help people. Was kindness worth this?" Jack stared at the inferno that had been his life's work, his daughter's tears soaking into his shoulder, and for the first time in years, he had no answer to give her. The flames continued their destructive dance, casting wild shadows across the snow-covered street. Around them, neighbors whispered and pointed, some sympathetic. Others vindicated in their warnings about associating with criminals. But Jack barely heard them. He could only watch as everything he'd built turned slowly, inexorably, to ash. 3 days after the fire, Jack stood in the blackened shell of Callahan's place. The morning sun cast harsh shadows through the skeleton of burned rafters above. His boots crunched on broken glass and charred wood as he picked his way through what remained of his life's work. The air still carried the bitter scent of smoke. Jack's fingers brushed against a half-melted coffee pot, its chrome surface now warped and dulled. Memories of countless mornings pouring cups for regulars flashed through his mind. Near the kitchen, the specials board lay face down, its cheerful chalk letters reduced to smudges. "It's what he gets for mixing with those criminals," a woman's voice drifted through the broken windows. "Outside, missus?" Henderson from the flower shop spoke loudly to another passerby. "Bringing trouble right to our doorstep." "Shame about the place," her companion replied. "But he brought this on us. The whole town could have burned down." Jack's jaw tightened, but he kept moving through the wreckage. The booth where Emily used to do her homework was now just a blackened frame. The counter where he'd first faced down Victor and his men had partially collapsed. Everything that meant anything was gone. Back home, Emily sat at their kitchen table, staring blankly at her untouched breakfast. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. She hadn't been sleeping well since the fire. When Jack entered, she barely looked up. "The insurance adjuster called," she said flatly. "They're claiming it might be arson. They might not pay." Jack pulled out a chair and sat heavily. We'll figure something out, sweetheart. Like what, Dad? Emily's voice cracked. Your kindness got us nowhere. Those men are in jail, the diner's gone, and everyone hates us. She pushed away from the table. What good is having faith if this is what happens? The words hit Jack like physical blows. Emily had always been his moral compass, so like her mother in her ability to see the good in everything. Now that light had dimmed, and it scared him more than any fire. Emily, he started, but she was already heading to her room. The door closed with a soft click that somehow hurt worse than a slam would have. Jack drove to the cemetery later that morning. The graveyard was peaceful under a gray winter sky, snow dusting the headstones. He knelt before Sarah's grave, brushing snow from the marble. I could really use your wisdom right now, love, he whispered. His fingers traced the engraved letters of her name. Remember how you always said kindness was never wasted? I tried to live that. I really did. The wind whispered through bare tree branches above. Jack closed his eyes, remembering Sarah's smile, the way she'd handled every crisis with grace and unwavering faith. Emily's losing hope. And honestly, his voice roughened. I'm not far behind. 23 men trusted me to help them find a better path, and now they're behind bars. Our daughter is questioning everything we taught her. He swallowed hard. What if I was wrong? What if compassion isn't enough? Snow began falling again, soft flakes catching in his gray hair. Jack stayed there, letting memories wash over him. Sarah singing while she cooked, teaching young Emily to pray, telling him that love was always worth the risk. The diner was our dream, he continued. We built it together, made it more than just a restaurant. It was a sanctuary for anyone who needed one. His shoulders shook. Now it's ashes, and I don't know how to fix any of it. The silence stretched on, broken only by distant traffic and the soft pat of snow on stone. Jack thought about Victor's face as the police led him away, about Alexi's younger cousins who would now go without their English lessons, about all the threads of hope that had been severed in one violent night. Standing slowly, Jack brushed snow from his knees. The old Marine in him wanted to fight, to find Sergei, and end this with force. But Sarah's voice seemed to whisper in his memory, violence only breeds violence, love. But kindness multiplies. He looked up at the gray sky, snowflakes swirling down like stars in daylight. Show me what to do, he whispered. Give me a sign that this path still means something. A single snowflake drifted down, landing in his outstretched palm. For a moment, it lay there perfect and crystalline before melting away. Like that snowflake, Jack felt something inside him soften. Not defeat, but a quiet thawing of his frozen hope. The county jail loomed gray and imposing against the winter sky. Jack pulled his worn jacket tighter as he walked through the metal detector, the guard's eyes following him with a mix of sympathy and suspicion. Everyone in town knew about the fire at Callahan's place by now. Here to see the Russians, Jack said quietly, handing over his ID. The guard raised an eyebrow but nodded. They led him to a large holding room with metal tables bolted to the floor. One by one, the 23 men filed in, their orange jumpsuits a stark contrast to the server aprons they'd worn just days ago. Victor entered last, his tall frame stooped, dark circles under his eyes. Mr. Callahan, Victor said, his voice rough. Why are you here? We did not burn your place. I know you didn't, Jack replied, meeting each man's gaze. Sergei did this, and I'm not abandoning you now. Alexei, the youngest, spoke up from the back. But your diner, everything is gone because of us. Jack shook his head. Not because of you, because of fear and control. The same fear and control that's kept you under Sergei's thumb all these years. The men shifted uncomfortably. A heavy silence filled the room. There's a way out, Jack continued, his voice steady. Testify against him. Tell the police everything. The reaction was immediate. Several men stood up, chairs scraping against concrete. Others began speaking rapidly in Russian, their voices angry and afraid. Impossible. Victor slammed his hand on the table. You don't understand. Sergei will kill our families, our children. The police can protect them, Jack insisted. Emily's already helping some of your kids with school. We can get them all to safety, but you have to be brave enough to stand up. Brave? A bitter laugh from one of the older men. We are not heroes, Mr. Callahan. We are survivors. Jack leaned forward, his eyes intense. I saw you in my diner, serving food, laughing, helping people. That's who you really are. Not what Sergei made you become. Pretty words, Victor muttered. But words don't stop bullets. No, Jack agreed. But faith can move mountains, and I have faith in you men. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, worn Bible. Several of the Russians looked away, but Victor watched with an unreadable expression. In Iraq, Jack said quietly, I saw men face impossible odds because they believed in something bigger than themselves, something worth fighting for. We are not soldiers, one of the men protested. Aren't you? Jack's voice grew stronger. Every day you fight to protect your families, to give them a better life. But Sergei keeps you trapped, using that love against you. Alexei wiped his eyes. My sister, her medicine. We'll help her, Jack promised. All of them. But first, you have to help yourselves. Victor stood suddenly, pacing the length of the room. The others watched their lieutenant, waiting. If we do this, Victor said finally, if we testify, you will stay with us? Help us? Every step of the way, Jack vowed. You're not alone anymore. A murmur went through the group. Jack could see the fear in their eyes warring with something else, hope, maybe, or the first glimpse of freedom. My wife, Jack continued softly, she always said that true strength isn't in how hard you can hit, but in how much love you can show when the world's turned against you. Victor stopped pacing. Your wife was wise, woman. Yes, Jack smiled sadly. She was. The room grew quiet again, but different now. Thoughtful rather than fearful. Could we? Victor gestured at Jack's Bible. Could we pray? Like you did in diner? Jack's heart swelled. Of course. The men gathered closer, forming a rough circle. Some looked awkward, others curious. Victor bowed his head first, and slowly, the others followed. Jack opened his Bible, its pages familiar under his fingers. Dear Lord, he began, his voice gentle but firm. We come to you today as broken men seeking strength, not the strength of violence or revenge, but the strength to choose what's right. As he prayed, Jack heard sniffling from several of the men. Alexei was openly crying. Even Victor's shoulders shook slightly. And Lord, give these men courage, the courage to stand up for truth, to protect their families through justice rather than fear. Help them remember the goodness I saw in them, serving others with joy. Amen, Victor whispered when Jack finished. The word echoed around the circle, some accents thick, others barely audible. When Jack looked up, he saw something new in their eyes. Not just hope now, but a tiny spark of faith. The same faith that had guided him through war, through losing his wife, through every dark night. We will do it, Victor announced. We will testify. The others nodded, some quickly, some slowly, but all of them agreed. Thank you, Jack said simply. The guard called time, and Jack stood to leave. Each man shook his hand, some hugging him awkwardly through their restraints. We see you tomorrow? Alexei asked hopefully. Tomorrow, Jack promised, and every day until this is over. He walked out of the jail into thickening snow, his breath clouding in the cold air. The diner's ruins waited across town, but for the first time since the fire, Jack felt truly certain about rebuilding. Not just the walls and windows, but the lives of 23 men who'd found something worth fighting for. The old church's wooden pews creaked under the weight of the assembled townspeople. Morning light filtered through stained glass windows, casting colorful shadows across worried faces. Jack Callahan stood at the pulpit, his weathered hands gripping its edges. His work shirt was clean but wrinkled, as if he'd pulled it straight from the dryer that morning. I know what you're all thinking, Jack began, his voice steady but humble. That I brought trouble to our town. That my kindness was foolishness. He paused, looking across the faces he'd served coffee and pie to for years. Some wouldn't meet his eyes. Others watched with a mix of sympathy and uncertainty. Emily sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Pride shone in her eyes as she watched her father speak. Maybe you're right, Jack continued. Maybe it would have been easier to chase those men away that first night, to grab my shotgun instead of offering them a meal. He shook his head slowly. But easy isn't always right. Mrs. Henderson, who'd been coming to his diner for morning coffee for 15 years, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Next to her, Tom Wilson, the hardware store owner who'd warned Jack about losing customers, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. If we cannot forgive, if we cannot redeem, then we have nothing. Jack's voice grew stronger, filling the church. My wife, Emily's mother, she used to say our diner wasn't just about serving food, it was about serving hope, about treating every person who walked through those doors with dignity. A murmur rippled through the congregation. Jack saw Bob Miller, the construction foreman, nod slowly. Those men, yes, they made mistakes. Yes, they scared us. But they're also fathers, sons, brothers. They fixed our roof. They learned to serve tables. They showed us that change is possible if we're brave enough to believe in it. The pastor, standing to the side, smiled encouragingly at Jack. I'm not asking for money, Jack said, his voice softening. I'm not even asking for understanding. I'm asking for a chance to rebuild, not just a diner, but trust. To show that in this town, we don't give up on people. Any people. Emily wiped a tear from her cheek as several congregation members nodded. The silence in the church felt different now, contemplative rather than judgmental. My daughter asked me if kindness was worth it. Jack's voice cracked slightly. Looking at those ashes, I wondered too, but then I remembered something my Marine commander used to say. The harder the mission, the more important it is to complete it. Tom Wilson stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. I've got lumber at my store, he announced gruffly. Good stuff. Been saving it for something special. He looked at Jack. Guess this qualifies. Like a dam breaking. Others began to stand. I can do electrical work, called out Mike Peterson, the local electrician. My boys and I can help with the heavy lifting, Bob Miller added, his construction crew nodding beside him. Mrs. Henderson rose shakily, leaning on her cane. I may not be able to swing a hammer, but I can make sandwiches for the workers. One by one, people stood, offering what they could, tools, time, expertise. Emily beamed at her father, who stood speechless at the pulpit, his eyes glistening. The next morning, the burnt lot where Callahan's place had stood buzzed with activity. The charred debris had been cleared away, revealing bare earth ready for a new foundation. Pickup trucks lined the street, their beds full of lumber and supplies. Jack and Emily arrived early, carrying thermoses of coffee and boxes of donuts. They found Tom Wilson already there, measuring tape in hand, sketching plans on a notepad. Figured we might as well make it better than before, Tom said gruffly, not meeting Jack's eyes. Maybe add a bigger kitchen. Throughout the morning, more people arrived. Women from the church auxiliary set up a food station, serving coffee and sandwiches. Bob Miller directed his crew in laying out the foundation markers. The air filled with the sound of shovels hitting dirt, hammers striking nails, and the steady hum of conversation. Emily worked alongside her father, her ponytail dusty from construction debris. They hammered nails into floor joists together, their rhythms matching. Mom would love this, she said softly, wiping sweat from her forehead. Jack looked around at the scene. Former critics working shoulder to shoulder with loyal friends, all focused on raising his diner from the ashes. The skeleton of the new building was already taking shape, stronger and larger than before. She sure would, sweetheart, he replied, reaching for another nail. She sure would. Mrs. Henderson hobbled between workers, passing out cookies and words of encouragement. Mike Peterson cursed good-naturedly as he mapped out improved electrical plans. Even the town's mayor showed up, rolling up his sleeves and asking where he could help. By mid-afternoon, the basic frame stood outlined against the sky, a promise of renewal, a testament to the power of forgiveness. Jack watched Emily chatting with young Sarah Miller as they painted primer on new boards, both girls laughing despite the paint spots on their clothes. The sound of hammers echoed across the lot, a rhythm of redemption. Each strike seemed to say, this town believes, this town forgives, this town builds. The county courthouse buzzed with tension as people filed into the crowded gallery. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Jack Callahan sat rigid in his seat, his daughter Emily's hand clasped tightly in his. The air felt heavy with anticipation. 23 Russian men, looking strange and vulnerable in borrowed suits, filled the witness stand one by one. Their usual tough expressions were replaced with nervous glances and fidgeting hands. Viktor Baranov was the first to speak, his deep voice carrying across the hushed courtroom. We had no choice, Viktor explained, his accent thick with emotion. "Sergei threatened our families back home. He owned our debts, our lives. He described years of collecting money, breaking bones, and living in fear of Sergei's cruel punishments." In the defendant's chair, Sergei Ivanov sat with an icy smile, his expensive suit a stark contrast to his men's borrowed clothes. His eyes burned with hatred as he watched his empire crumble, testimony by testimony. Young Alexei took the stand next, his hands shaking as he gripped the wooden railing. "I only wanted to pay for my sister's medicine," he said, tears sliding down his cheeks. "Sergei promised loans, but then he owned us. We became his slaves." Emily squeezed her father's hand tighter. Jack remembered the quiet evenings when Alexei had studied English at their diner, desperate for a better life. More stories poured forth, tales of threats, violence, and desperate choices. One man described how Sergei had broken his fingers when a collection came up short. Another spoke of midnight visits to his children's bedroom, just to remind him who held the power. The jury members wiped tears and scribbled notes. Even the stern-faced judge seemed moved by the parade of broken lives Sergei had left in his wake. When they described the diner, the sanctuary Jack had created, their voices grew stronger. They told of finding friendship, dignity, and hope within its walls, of learning to serve others instead of intimidating them, of feeling human again. "Mr. Callahan showed us kindness when everyone else showed fear," Victor testified, his voice steady now. "He gave us more than food. He gave us back our souls." Sergei's lawyer tried to paint them as willing criminals, but their raw honesty cut through his skilled questioning. These weren't hardened mobsters anymore. They were fathers, sons, and brothers who had found the courage to stand up to their tormentor. The prosecutor presented evidence, ledgers of illegal loans, photos of beaten victims, recordings of threats, but it was the personal stories that seemed to affect the jury most deeply. The small details, like how Jack had taught them to fold napkins, or how Emily had helped their children with homework, humanized them in ways no legal argument could match. When Sergei took the stand, his charm had turned to venom. He spat accusations of betrayal and threats of revenge. The mask of civilization slipped, revealing the monster beneath. His own testimony did more damage than any witness could have. Jack watched silently from the gallery, his military posture straight but his eyes soft with compassion. Every time one of his boys, as he'd come to think of them, looked his way, he gave a small nod of encouragement. Emily smiled through her tears, squeezing her father's hand. The deliberation was surprisingly brief. When the jury returned, their faces were set with determination. The foreman stood, paper trembling slightly in her hands. "On all counts, we find the defendant guilty." A wave of relief swept through the courtroom. Several of the Russians crossed themselves, whispering prayers of thanks. Sergei's face twisted with rage as the bailiffs approached with handcuffs. "You're all dead men," he snarled, struggling as they led him away. But his threats rang hollow now. His power was broken, his reign of terror ended by the simple courage of the men he'd thought he owned. Victor turned in his seat, his eyes meeting Jack's across the courtroom. Tears streaked his weathered face as he whispered, "You gave us courage." In that moment, Jack remembered his late wife's words about the diner being more than just a restaurant. She had dreamed of it being a place of healing and hope. Looking at the freed men before him, he knew she would have been proud. The courtroom slowly emptied, but the former mobsters lingered, gathering around Jack and Emily like a family, reuniting after a long storm. Their relief was palpable, their gratitude expressed in tearful embraces and broken English. Sergei's final view as the bailiffs led him through the door was of his former empire. Not scattered and afraid, but standing tall together, united by the very compassion he had tried to destroy. The door closed behind him with a final, decisive click. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the freshly painted walls of Callahan's place. The rebuilt diner stood proud and gleaming, its windows sparkling like diamonds in the early light. The smell of fresh paint mingled with the aroma of coffee and bacon as Jack Callahan walked through his new kitchen, running his hand along the smooth stainless steel counters. Everything was bigger now. The dining room had doubled in size, with warm wooden booths lining the walls and a long counter that curved like a welcoming smile. But what caught everyone's eye was the mural that covered the entire back wall. Emily stood before it, adding final touches with a small brush. In the painting, her mother Sarah seemed to step right out of the wall, dressed in a classic waitress uniform, holding a tray of steaming coffee. Her eyes sparkled with the same kindness that Emily had inherited, and her smile held all the warmth that Jack remembered. The artist had captured every detail, from the tiny dimple in her left cheek to the way her auburn hair caught the light. "It's perfect," Jack said softly, coming to stand beside his daughter. "She would have loved it." Emily wiped a paint-smudged hand across her cheek, leaving a streak of color. "Do you think it looks like her?" "Every detail." Jack's voice cracked slightly. "Right down to the way she used to balance that tray on her fingertips. Remember how she could carry 6 plates at once? And never dropped a single one," Emily finished, smiling through tears. Outside, vehicles began pulling into the parking lot. The Russians arrived first, piling out of their cars in pressed white shirts and black pants. They'd spent the past week practicing proper serving techniques, determined to do things right. Victor led them, carrying a large box of pastries his wife had baked for the occasion. "Ready for business, boss?" Victor called out, his accent softer now after months of Emily's English lessons. He distributed clean black aprons to his former gang members, who put them on with careful pride. Alexei, the youngest of the group, straightened his collar nervously. "I still worry I will spill the coffee," he admitted in halting English. "You'll do fine," Emily assured him, giving his arm a squeeze. "Besides, that's why we bought extra cups." The morning light grew stronger as more people arrived. The mayor stood chatting with the pastor, while Mrs. Henderson from the quilting circle arranged flowers on every table. The local high school band set up in the corner, brass instruments glinting. Jack watched as his former enemies turned, employees moved through their preparation routines. Dmitri, once Sergei's enforcer, now carefully arranged sugar packets and cream containers at each place setting. Yuri, who used to collect protection money, gently wiped water spots from the glasses. Each man moved with purpose, carrying themselves with a dignity that had nothing to do with intimidation. "Look at them," Emily whispered to her father. "They're like different people." Jack nodded, remembering those first terrifying nights when they'd stormed in demanding money. "Sometimes people just need someone to believe in them," he said. "Your mother taught me that." The clock ticked closer to opening time. Through the windows, Jack could see the crowd growing, familiar faces from every corner of town. The same people who had once shunned him for harboring criminals now stood eagerly waiting to enter. Emily adjusted the fresh flowers in their vases one last time, then helped the Russians tie their aprons properly. Their large hands, once used for violence, now fumbled with the strings. But they laughed at their own clumsiness. "Remember," Victor announced to his men, "smile like Jack taught us. Not scary smile like before. Real smile from heart." They practiced, transforming their faces from stern to welcoming, and Emily couldn't help but giggle at their earnest efforts. Jack gathered everyone in a circle near the counter. 23 former mobsters, his daughter, and himself, an unlikely family brought together by crisis and held together by grace. The morning sun streamed through the windows, catching the edges of Sarah's painted face on the wall behind them. "Before we open," Jack said, his voice steady and warm, "I want to thank each of you. This diner isn't just about serving food, it's about serving hope. Every person who walks through that door is family, just like all of you have become family to us." Victor cleared his throat gruffly. "We thank you, Jack Callahan. You show us better way when no one else would try." The others nodded, some wiping at their eyes. Emily reached for her father's hand, squeezing it tight. Jack looked at his watch. It was time. He moved toward the front door where the crowd waited, keys jingling in his hand. The new sign above the door caught the sunlight, its fresh paint gleaming. "Callahan's Place, where everyone belongs." The band struck up a cheerful tune as Jack reached for the lock. Behind him, 23 men in clean aprons stood ready to serve. Emily beamed with pride, and Sarah's painted eyes watched over them all with eternal kindness. Jack turned the key, and cheers erupted as the door swung wide. The town poured in, bringing with them the promise of new beginnings and the warmth of community restored. The evening rush at Callahan's Place had become something special. Steam rose from fresh coffee cups as the aroma of apple pie and pot roast filled the air. The diner hummed with the sound of multiple languages, English mixed with Russian, laughter acting as the universal translator. Jack stood behind the counter, his experienced hands working the grill while he watched his transformed world unfold before him. The new diner was larger than before, with warm wooden panels and bigger windows that let in streams of evening light. Pictures dotted the walls, some from the old place, others new memories being made. "Order up," he called, sliding 2 plates toward Victor, who had traded his dark leather jacket for a clean white apron. The former mobster moved with surprising grace between tables, delivering meals with a slight bow that always made customers smile. "Thank you, Victor," Mrs. Anderson said, the elderly woman who once crossed the street to avoid the Russians now beaming up at him. "And please tell your wife her pierogies at the church potluck were divine." Victor's weathered face softened. "She will be very happy to hear this." At the counter, 3 construction workers shared coffee with some of the Russians who had once been part of Sergei's crew. They discussed building techniques, comparing methods from their homelands, their earlier mistrust forgotten over countless shared meals and projects. "The foundation trick you showed us last week," one of the construction workers said, gesturing with his coffee cup, "saved us 3 days of work on the Miller project." The diner had become more than just a restaurant. Jack had made sure of that. The Help Wanted sign stayed permanently in the window, but it meant something different now. It wasn't just about hiring waiters or cooks. It was an open door for anyone needing a fresh start. Last week, it was a teenager caught shoplifting who now washed dishes with pride. The week before, a woman escaping an abusive relationship found work as a hostess, her smile growing more genuine each day. Jack watched them all with quiet satisfaction, remembering his wife's words about everyone deserving a second chance. Near the back, Emily had transformed a corner booth into an impromptu classroom. What started as English lessons for a few Russian children had grown into something bigger. Now, every afternoon after school, kids from all over town gathered there. Today, they were working on math, heads bent together over notebooks while Emily moved between them, offering encouragement in both languages. "Multiplication isn't so scary, see?" she was saying to little Marina, Alexei's sister, whose eyes lit up when the numbers finally made sense. The girl's medical treatments were going well, paid for now by honest work rather than criminal activities. Alexei himself had blossomed under Jack's mentorship. The young man managed the diner's repairs with skilled hands and growing confidence. Gone was the nervous boy who'd first entered the diner with Sergei's crew. In his place stood a capable young man who'd found his purpose. "Jack," Alexei called from near the kitchen. "The new refrigerator's making that sound again. Mind if I take a look after closing?" "Go ahead." Jack nodded, trusting him completely. "Just don't stay too late. You've got that community college class in the morning." The dinner rush ebbed and flowed, a rhythm as natural as breathing. Regular customers mixed with newcomers, all served by a staff that looked more like family than employees. The Russians who'd chosen to stay in town had integrated so well that sometimes Jack had to remind himself of how it all began. Through the serving window, Jack watched Emily end her tutoring session. Marina hugged her tight. School books clutched to her chest. The other children gathered their things, calling out goodbye in mixed English and Russian. Their parents would arrive soon, sharing coffee and conversation while picking up their kids. Another small tradition that had grown organically in the new Callahan's place. "Papa," Emily said, approaching the counter with Marina still by her side. "Marina got an A on her English test today." Her face glowed with teacher's pride. "Is this true?" Jack asked, reaching under the counter for a special treat he kept for occasions like this. Marina nodded shyly, then broke into a bright smile as Jack presented her with a chocolate chip cookie the size of a saucer. It was the same kind he used to give Emily when she brought home good grades. The girl's joy reminded Jack so much of his late wife. Her belief that food could heal hearts, that a simple cookie could celebrate victory, that every small kindness mattered. He watched as Emily and Marina settled into a booth, heads close together as they shared the cookie, and giggled over some private joke. The scene before him suddenly crystallized everything his wife had dreamed of creating in this place. Not just a diner, but a sanctuary where people could find belonging, where second chances were served daily alongside the soup of the day, where love could transform lives as easily as bread and coffee. Jack leaned against the counter, taking in the whole picture. Victor teaching a young waiter the proper way to carry multiple plates. Alexei's confident movements as he checked the refrigerator's mechanics. The mixed voices of English and Russian floating through the air like music. Emily and Marina sharing crumbs and laughter in their booth. This was his wife's dream, made real in ways he never could have imagined. A family that extended far beyond blood. A home that welcomed everyone. A place where hope was always on the menu. He wiped his hands on his apron, emotion catching in his throat as he watched Emily throw her head back in laughter at something Marina said. The two girls, one American and one Russian, looked for all the world like sisters sharing a secret. This was the family his wife had always wanted to build, not defined by borders or backgrounds, but by love and second chances. The autumn sun was setting early, casting long shadows through Callahan's Place's newly installed windows. Fall decorations adorned every corner, paper turkeys made by Emily's students, crimson maple leaves scattered artfully on tablecloths, and warm candlelight flickering in mason jars. The diner had been transformed for its first Thanksgiving celebration since the rebuilding. Jack adjusted his apron, surveying the scene before him with quiet amazement. 6 long tables had been pushed together down the center of the diner, forming one continuous feast-worthy surface. Steam rose from an array of dishes that bridged cultures. Traditional American turkey sat next to Russian pierogi, mashed potatoes beside beef stroganoff, and 3 different kinds of stuffing competed for space with cabbage rolls. The kitchen door swung open as Victor emerged, carrying the last turkey, his massive frame somehow graceful as he navigated between chairs. "This bird," he announced with pride, "I cook myself." American style, but with secret Russian touch. His accent, though still thick, had softened over the months, just as his stern face had learned to smile more easily. Emily darted around the tables, adjusting name cards she'd carefully written in both English and Russian. She'd spent hours planning the seating, making sure to mix the townspeople with their former adversaries. "Dad," she called out, "should Mrs. Henderson sit next to Alexei's grandmother? They both love knitting." "Good thinking, sweetie," Jack replied, watching as his daughter's thoughtful arrangements brought unlikely pairs together. She'd grown so much in these past months, her heart expanding to embrace this unusual extended family they'd built. The bell above the door chimed continuously as guests arrived, shaking off the November chill. Old Mr. Peterson, who'd once led the charge against the Russian invasion, now helped Alexei's grandmother with her coat. The town sheriff, who'd arrested several of the men months ago, carried in a homemade pecan pie and clapped Victor on the shoulder like an old friend. Children darted between adults' legs, playing tag in multiple languages. Among them was Sophie, Alexei's little sister, whose medical bills had once driven him to Sergei's organization. Now she was healthy, bright-eyed, and top of Emily's English class. "Everyone!" Jack called out, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had first commanded respect from 23 desperate men. "Please, find your seats." The shuffle of chairs and murmur of voices filled the air as nearly 60 people settled around the tables. Jack looked at the faces illuminated by candlelight. Faces that had once been drawn with fear or hatred, now soft with friendship and anticipation. Emily had saved the seat next to Jack for Victor, a symbolic placement that wasn't lost on anyone. On Jack's other side sat Emily, her eyes bright with joy as she watched her carefully orchestrated seating plan work its magic. Already, conversations were flowing across old boundaries. Victor rose, his water glass held high. The room fell silent, everyone turning to the man who'd once struck fear into their hearts. Now he stood before them, humble yet dignified in a crisp white shirt and dark tie, his scarred hands steady as he held his glass. "I want to make toast," he began, his deep voice carrying emotion that made his accent thicker. "To man who changed everything. To soldier who fought hardest battle for souls." Victor's eyes met Jack's. "You fight not with bullets, but with love, with pancakes." This earned a wave of appreciative laughter. "With faith in people everyone else give up on." Jack felt Emily's small hand slip into his, squeezing gently. Looking at her, he saw tears in her eyes matching his own. "Dad," she whispered, leaning close, "I'm proud of you." Victor wasn't finished. "1 year ago we come here as animals, as slaves to fear. Jack Callahan, he see men instead. He give us not just food, but dignity. Not just shelter, but home." Victor's voice cracked slightly. "Now look at us, free men, good men, family." "Family," echoed through the room as glasses were raised. Jack gazed around the table, emotion tightening his throat. Mrs. Henderson was already teaching Alexei's grandmother how to knit American style. The town's banker was passing potatoes to a man he'd once crossed the street to avoid. Sophie was teaching other children Russian words between bites of turkey. the walls that had once divided them, walls of fear, prejudice, and misunderstanding, had crumbled like the ashes of his old diner. In their place stood something stronger, a community bound together by forgiveness and second chances. A burst of laughter drew his attention to the far end of the table, where one of his former adversaries was attempting to explain the concept of American football to a group of bewildered Russian grandmothers. The scene warmed Jack's heart more than any fire could. "You're thinking about Mom, aren't you?" Emily asked softly, noticing his expression. Jack nodded, glancing at the mural of his late wife that graced the diner's wall. Her painted smile seemed to glow in the candlelight, as if she too were celebrating this moment. She always said a restaurant was just a building, but a diner, a real diner, was a home for anyone who needed one. Victor raised his glass one final time. "To Jack Callahan," he proclaimed, "man who teach us that real strength is in here." He tapped his chest. "And to Emily, who teach us everything else." This brought another round of laughter and applause. Jack looked around at the faces that had once been twisted with fear and hatred, now glowing with joy and belonging. Former enemies passed dishes to one another like family. Children who once would have run in terror now played beneath the tables. Love had done what force never could. It had transformed them all. Here, in this moment, surrounded by the warmth of unlikely friendship and the aroma of shared food, Jack realized he had more family now than he had ever dreamed possible. His diner had become exactly what his wife had envisioned. Not just a place to eat, but a sanctuary where broken lives could be mended, where fear could be transformed into friendship, and where love could work its quiet miracles over coffee and pie. The morning sun painted golden stripes across the freshly swept sidewalk in front of Callahan's place. Jack stood outside, hands in his pockets, taking in the familiar squeak of the screen door as early customers filed in for breakfast. The new sign above the entrance caught the light, its carefully hand-painted letters declaring, "Callahan's Place, where everyone belongs," in warm burgundy and cream. Inside, the clatter of plates and gentle murmur of conversation drifted through the open windows. Victor called out orders in his thick accent, now peppered with perfect American diner lingo he'd picked up over the months. "2 sunny side up, hash browns, extra crispy." The smell of coffee and fresh-baked bread wrapped around the building like a comfortable blanket. Jack's eyes drifted to the parking lot where Emily's old Honda sat packed with boxes and suitcases. His daughter had worked double shifts all winter to save up for college, and now spring had arrived too quickly. She'd been accepted to study education, inspired by her experiences teaching English to the Russians' children. The screen door creaked again, and Emily stepped out carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to her father, her eyes bright but rimmed with tears. "I made it just how you like it, black with 2 sugars." She leaned against the wall beside him, both of them watching the town wake up. "You know, Mom would be so proud of you," Jack said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "Going to college, teaching those kids, showing everyone what compassion really means." Emily brushed at her eyes with her free hand. "I learned it from both of you. Mom always said kindness was like planting seeds. You might not see the flowers right away, but they'll bloom eventually." She gestured at the diner. "Look at all the flowers we've grown here." Through the windows, they could see Alexei teaching his younger sister how to work the register while Ivan, once the most intimidating of Victor's men, carefully arranged fresh flowers in vases on each table. The diner had become more than just a restaurant. It was a sanctuary where second chances flourished. "I promised to carry everything she taught us," Emily continued, her voice stronger now. "Every student I teach will know that everyone deserves kindness, no matter where they came from or what mistakes they've made." Jack turned to his daughter. Seeing so much of his late wife in her determined expression, he pulled her into a tight embrace, not bothering to hide the tears that fell into her hair. "Your mother's spirit lives in everything you do, sweetheart. You've got her heart, her strength." The screen door squeaked again as Victor poked his head out. "Jack, Emily, come quick. We want picture before little teacher leaves us." His voice was gruff with affection. Inside, all 23 former mobsters had gathered, wearing their clean white aprons with pride. They'd arranged themselves around the counter, leaving space in the center. Some of their children sat on the stools, swinging their legs and clutching drawings they'd made for their favorite teacher. "Miss Emily," called out Alexei's sister Marina, holding up a crayon picture of stick figures in a diner. "For your new room at college." Emily accepted it with a watery smile, carefully folding it to pack with her things. The men shuffled around, positioning Jack and Emily in the middle of their group. Dmitri, who discovered a talent for photography during his redemption journey, set up a camera on a tripod. "Okay, everyone say pancakes," Dmitri called out, setting the timer and hurrying to join the group. "Pancakes," they chorused, their accents blending together in joyful discord. The flash went off, capturing the moment forever. 23 men who had once inspired fear now standing tall with dignity, their faces bright with honest joy, surrounding the father and daughter who had helped them find their way home. After the photo, the men returned to their duties, but not before each one hugged Emily goodbye. Victor was last, pressing something into her hand, a small silver charm shaped like a coffee cup. "To remember your first students," he said gruffly. "We will miss our teacher." Emily attached it to her bracelet right away, the charm catching the morning light. "I'll be back on breaks," she promised. "Someone has to make sure you're all pronouncing Worcestershire sauce correctly." The morning grew warmer as they loaded the last of Emily's boxes into her car. The diner hummed with life behind them. Alexei calling out orders, Ivan greeting regulars by name, Marina practicing her English with customers who now patiently helped her learn. Jack stood with his arm around Emily, both of them taking in the scene one last time before her departure. Through the windows, they could see the wall, where her mural of her mother still watched over everything. Serving tray balanced perfectly, eternal smile blessing all who entered. As the sun climbed higher, casting its light across the renewed heart of their town, Jack closed his eyes briefly. "We did it," he whispered, the words meant for his late wife's memory. "We built hope from ashes." He opened his eyes to see the diner glowing with life and laughter, a beacon of redemption for anyone who walked through its doors. Emily squeezed his hand one last time before sliding into her car. The screen door continued its steady rhythm of squeaks and slams, the sound of welcome, of belonging, of second chances given and received. Inside, Victor's booming laugh mixed with the chatter of morning customers, the clink of coffee cups, and the sizzle of grills, the music of redemption playing on. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Jack Callahan, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.